Morning, this is Brian. Today is Thursday, September 25th, 2025, and I'm near the San Diego River in Santee, California, part of San Diego County, east of the city of San Diego, north of the city of El Cajon. I want to do a spotlight on plants video today. This is another long-awaited spotlight video, and today I want to focus on this plant here. This is Western, aka grass leaf goldenrod. This is Euthamia occidentalis. This is a quite large herbaceous perennial in the sunflower family, the Asteraceae, and it is an occasional fixture here along the edges of meadows near riparian sections. Riparian referring to stream bank and waterside locations where a lot of plants that like riparian sections grow. Riparian coming from the Latin term ripa, which is stream bank. And this plant likes to grow in the understory of riparian woodlands and forests, and was formerly known as Solidago occidentalis. It used to be in the genus Solidago, which is the genus for the other goldenrods. We have another species, Solidago velutina subspecies californica, which I presented in a spotlight video a couple of years ago, if you want to refer to that one. But this one's DNA was found to be a little bit different, so it was assigned to a different genus, Euthamia. So what we have here, tall, generally upright, colony-forming plants. This is all genetically identical right here. They all are formed from the rhizomes. In other words, underground roots and stems that spread, and plants pop, new shoots pop up from the roots. So generally this plant is seasonally dormant. Like trees that shed their leaves in autumn and go leafless in winter, goldenrod, this type of goldenrod will die back to its roots and resprout from those same roots in the spring. Pretty common feature in a lot of our native perennials that are what we call ephemeral or seasonal plants. So I did mention that another name for this is grass leaf goldenrod, and if you look at the leaves, they are kind of narrow blades, and they are what we call sessile. In other words, they lack a petiole. In other words, there's no leaf stalk that goes right to the stem, and they're very narrow and a little bit grass-like. So when this plant's not in bloom, to the untrained eye, this might appear as some kind of grass or similar plant. But no, this is a sunflower family plant. And you can see here, like a lot of plants, they also have axial foliage too. At axial foliage right here, you can see growing in the axil of the leaves is another little tiny shoot, axial shoots. So why am I focusing on this plant now? Because like a lot of goldenrods in the genus Solidago, this plant also likes to bloom towards the end of summer and into early, sometimes mid-autumn. And I'll be getting to that very momentarily after I shoot a couple pictures, and we'll start talking about some of the more interesting features of this beautiful plant. So, previous pictures, you got to see a couple pictures of the leaves and stems, and then you got to see previous years' flower seed heads. As you can tell, this is one from previous years, and you can tell it's brown because it died back to the roots. But you notice that the rest of the colony resprouts in the spring, as I had mentioned before. So here's a previous year's shoot, and being that this is an herbaceous plant, not a really woody plant, we're looking at mostly very green photosynthetic stems that do what the leaves do. They photosynthesize in the sun. And of course, the older the stems, the older portions of the stems will be a little bit browner towards the base. You can see a lot of brownish green stalks, but we're not really forming wood. Really not forming wood because this is an herbaceous plant. But again, as you can see, the plant does spread out from the center quite a bit, as here's another part of this identical colony. So on this plant, I mentioned that it's a goldenrod, and you probably saw some evidence of it as I was moving my camera around. You could tell that it gets these seasonal blossoms that are goldenrod-like. Really small discoid flower heads that individually are pretty small, but they do form some pretty nice displays. And these are discoid flowers. We don't really have, let me see, look at this closely. We don't really have true ray florets. In other words, those petal-looking things you see on sunflowers and related plants that in daisies. These are more discoid flower heads. And again, I say flower head because each individual thing that looks like a flower is actually a composite of florets or miniature flowers. So this right here, it looks like a cluster of, it looks like a cluster of 7 flowers. It's not. It's a cluster of 7 flower heads. Each of these individual pieces hold several discoid florets. Again, no radiate florets or ray florets on Euthamia occidentalis. So come late summer, especially September, late summer, like anywhere from early September through October, here you go. In mass, this is a very cheerful and beautiful sight. And this is the first time I've ever seen this plant in flower. I've seen this plant on a few occasions before when it's growing upright and sprouting new shoots, or when it's starting to get flower buds on it last year. But this is the first time I've actually seen this plant in bloom, and it is a delight. A great plant that likes these slightly moister, grassy locations near the woods. Because I've seen this plant mostly near woods. And some of these are already starting to senesce. In other words, the flowers are starting to age, and if they're pollinated correctly, they should eventually become seed heads. You can see they're starting to turn brown here where my thumb is touching, and they should eventually become seed heads. Let's see if I can get a little past this and see if I can get a good, get some more good visuals. But I'm definitely going to take my time on this one because this is a very, very special addition for me because I don't get to see this plant a whole lot, and this is the first time I've ever seen it in bloom. So I'm trying to take time to appreciate this beautiful, beautiful plant. So now what I need to do is get a couple pictures of this plant, and we'll talk a little bit more about this beautiful, beautiful native. Let's take some time to appreciate this. Now, from what I understand, this is mostly a lower elevation plant. I don't think it's supposed to be found at super high elevations in our mountains. I don't remember seeing it at super high elevations in our mountains. I think this one's generally found below 4,000 or 5,000 feet. Of course, I will double check some of my facts and relay some more information if necessary. But what a beautiful, stunning late summer to early mid-fall wildflower. And it's hard to get good pictures of this because there's so much other vegetation in the way. And this plant is so thinly vegetative. Its foliage is so thin and stuff. It's really hard to get good pictures of this plant, especially when there are trees in the background. And don't get it twisted, I love these trees in the background. But when I'm trying to focus on getting footage of this plant, it's hard to get good photographs of it. So I think this is going to be less of a picture than but more of a video type thing going on here. But yeah, I just can't get over this. And if you notice, very common in Asteraceae, the size of the leaves differs on what part of the stem on which the leaves are growing. Look how small, narrow, and tiny the leaves are on the upper stalk, just underneath the inflorescence, aka the structure where the flowers are held. But as you notice, as you go down, the leaves start getting bigger and bigger and longer. Much longer down here, further down on the stalk. Pretty common occurrence with a lot of plants, especially shrubs and perennials and in herbaceous annuals and stuff like that, to have smaller leaves on top, larger leaves down below. Now don't get it mixed up with this here. It's a very similar plant, which is also an Asteraceae, but this is called mule fat. This is Baccharis salicifolia, subspecies salicifolia, which has similar leaves. So if the plants are not in bloom, you could potentially mix this up with other plants like erigeron, horseweeds, and mule fat. But mule fat has wider leaves, longer leaves, is an upright perennial shrub, which has a woody base, and has white flower heads. Again, that's also an Asteraceae, so the flowers are composite, aka compound flowers. The former name for the Asteraceae used to be called compositae because of the composite flower heads on these plants. And every time I do a spotlight on an Asteraceae, I'm going to say the same thing over and over and over again. So I'd like to reiterate myself on these. But I just cannot get enough of these flower heads. Eventually they will graduate into these small seed heads. Eventually. This is last year's growth. And if you do have enough water, you wouldn't have to really flood this plant all the time. But if you give it enough water, you might be able to get some pretty tall stuff growing in your ground. It might spread pretty voraciously if it gets established pretty well, but this would make a great garden plant and a great habitat plant for pollinating bees, insects, birds, and other animals. Probably be good at stabilizing stream banks in number. Now, like a lot of other Asteraceae, you'll notice sometimes this thing looks like somebody hocked a loogie on it. But this is called spittlebug froth. It comes from an insect that creates a spittle. So it looks like somebody had, sorry to be gross, but hocked a loogie. This is actually a natural occurrence from a spittlebug. So spittlebug froth. I do see that quite a bit on Asteraceae plants, especially a lot on California sagebrush, related Artemisia californica. I have seen it a lot on that plant especially, but sometimes on other Asteraceae you'll see that as well. So it's a native insect. So there you go. Proof positive that this is a beautiful wildlife habitat plant. Now, I mentioned it likes these more riparian sections, so especially near creeks, streams, and maybe ponds, and especially in the presence of woodland and forest trees like Fremont cottonwood, this large tree right here, California box elder maple, Acer negundo californicum, other trees like willows and sycamores and stuff like that, mule fat, of course. You have a good chance of finding this one as well. Now, in my experience, in my personal experience, like I said, I've come across this pretty scarcely in my travels and hikes, but this is the perfect environment, riparian areas. Just don't expect it to be super abundant. It's pretty occasional. Now, as for its range here in California, again, it's mostly, in my experience, a low elevation plant, but in the screen here, I should have listed the more comprehensive range in California where this plant grows. It is just an awesome plant. Now, back to what I was talking about earlier, the It used to be Solidago occidentalis before it became Euthamia occidentalis. So what does the epithet or the specific name occidentalis mean? If you've seen field guides to plants and even field guides to animals, a lot of times you'll come across the species name occidentalis. Occidentalis is Latin for western. Therefore, western goldenrod. So you'll see the name occidentalis. It generally refers to a western distribution of the plant. So I'm going to get a few more pictures. I think I might be able to get a few decent pictures here and there. And then I'm going to go ahead and come up with some ending thoughts on this beautiful plant. Alright, so, western goldenrod. First time I've ever come across this plant in bloom. Been wanting to find this. I was going to try to do a spotlight on this last year. But finally got to it. Euthamia occidentalis. What a beautiful part of our native plant community here in Southern California. Finally got to come across this in bloom. I know I pointed it out not in bloom on previous hikes on occasion, but to see it in bloom, it's just such a special occasion. And they do have a slight fragrance. If you ever have smelled a sunflower flower head, if you ever smelled a sunflower's flower head, it does have a little bit of an aroma. It does have a bit of an aroma. It does have a little bit of a floral smell. So if you've ever sniffed a sunflower flower head, Euthamia occidentalis smells pretty much like it. It does smell like a sunflower, which is pretty cool. Looks like the fig beetle likes it too. So yes, Euthamia occidentalis. Beautiful. So glad to have seen this plant. Finally seen it in bloom. That's why this was an instant spotlight video waiting to happen. I cut off a exploratory video and stopped filming just so I can get to this. Ooh, a mantis. Ooh, a mantis. See? Yes. I keep telling you, wildlife love this plant. And I just keep seeing more wildlife every time I turn around. Look at this mantis. Brown mantis. Man, this could not have been a more fun video to record. Wildlife love it. And so do I. Euthamia occidentalis, western goldenrod, aka grassleaf goldenrod. That's going to basically wrap up my spotlight video. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed recording it. I think it will pretty much do it for me on this one. Here's some ones that haven't really flowered much yet. Well, there you go. Euthamia occidentalis. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. And I will see you in my next spotlight video.